But this one, we're going to go into, since we are focusing on the books, we're going to go and give you a look at one of the top rated and top acclaimed series of the books of what is called the Post-Nemesis Canon. Of course, being after the movie Star Trek Nemesis and going forward from there, following the adventures of the Next Generation crew, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, and a lot of these novels actually bring in a couple of TOS characters too.
Really?
There's not many, like when you look at the canon as a whole, I think Kirk is actually the only one that's dead.
Well,
and then Spock.
Scotty is up and running around. We know about that.
Because,
they recover him from the Genolan.
Yeah. He actually ended up being a chief engineer of the Enterprise all over again.
Really?
In the books.
Well, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. He was chief engineer of the Enterprise E when it went on his maiden voyage under Captain Bateson, I believe it was, who, if I'm not mistaken, was featured in the Time Loop episode of The Next Generation.
Kelsey Grammer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he actually was the captain of the Enterprise E on its maiden voyage, and Scotty was the chief engineer, and they got into...
It's always wild how they do that, but at the same time you go like, what, are there only like 19 people in Starfleet?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It suffers from Star Wars syndrome in that way. A lot of the Star Wars books do that too, that Luke Skywalker's the only one in the universe that can have any kind of say in anything.
Oh, yeah. It was like Phantom Menace when Greedo showed... Well, I know it ended up not being Greedo, but yeah, that was kind of the thing, though.
But this book series is called Star Trek Destiny.
Okay.
And it takes place about 5 or so years after the Dominion War, the big plot arc of Deep Space Nine, and consequently, again, one of my favorite arcs of television in general, if not Star Trek in particular. I loved everything that Deep Space Nine did with those last 4 seasons on that arc. That was just... Yeah. Sometimes when I go back to rewatch Deep Space Nine, I'll start in the middle of season 3, in the middle of season 4, the episode where they first are introduced to the Jem'Hadar, and I will watch straight through from there and just leave the first bit out, even though there's a lot of episodes in there that I like.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way with Babylon 5. I'll skip the first season. Season 2 is where they really started hitting. And that's part of why I didn't like Deep Space Nine, as I was watching Babylon 5 while they were running concurrently, and then I'd watch Deep Space Nine and go, because the first season didn't catch me. Yeah. I don't think it caught anybody. But by the time the story started kicking in, I'm like, this is a lot like Babylon 5, isn't it? There's a lot going on here. It's kind of similar.
Yeah. Deep Space Nine is definitely one of those series that I kind of keep on reserve. And I'd try and get people into Star Trek. I'll start them off again with my oft-mentioned and frequently loved film, The Wrath of Khan. Move them through the films, get a couple episodes of TNG in there, and then when they start getting the hook in the mouth real good, then I'm like, okay, let's go in the back room and show you some real stuff.
Show you the heavy lifting.
Yeah. Show you the discerning clientele's Star Trek here. But our story tonight actually starts within Deep Space Nine. Okay. Anyone who is a fan of Deep Space Nine will remember that there was an episode, and I am horrible with episode names if it has not been revealed already, but it was an episode where the Defiant ends up in the Gamma Quadrant around a planet inhabited by a colony of humanoids that is descended from them, because some type of temporal anomaly happened that sent the Defiant back in time 1,000 years. They were stranded there, and they all ended up intermarrying and creating this civilization, and ended up meeting up with their progenitors 1,000 years later or so, and tried to keep them on the planet, because if they weren't on the planet, then the ship wouldn't crash. If the ship wouldn't crash, then none of them would exist.
Predestination theory.
Yeah. Trek time travel babble.
Yep.
Whole hour of it. Great episode, though. Cannot remember the name. But this takes place about a week afterward, where the crew of the Defiant find an abandoned hulk on an abandoned planet of an NX-class starship, the Columbia, which, when the timeline, went missing over 200 years beforehand.
Right.
Jadzia Dax, whose second host worked with the ship in dry dock before her final mission, is super keen on investigating this wreckage and discovering how this ship, that could only get a capacity of warp 5 at best, ended up all the way in the Gamma Quadrant, crashed on an abandoned planet. And they're talking with each other. Jadzia is talking to Cisco and trying to figure out the logistics of salvaging this ship and possibly bringing it back to the station so that they can give it a proper look over, maybe put it in a museum. And Major Kira is super uncomfortable about it and claims that there's a bunch of ghosts inhabiting the halls.
Superstitious people see superstitious things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And of course that gets brushed off. And it's like, oh no, you're just seeing things. We're going to go see what we can get out of here, maybe get the computer core. And while they're in the middle of planning out how exactly they're going to do this, Worf gets on the comms to everybody and informs them that a Jem'Hadar strike force is en route to their position and they need to leave now. Everybody gets beamed up back to the Defiant, the Columbia's position's marked, and the Defiant breaks orbit. And soon after that, the Dominion War that we've seen in the show breaks out. And there's obviously, they're not going to stop the fighting so that they can go take a look at a 200-year-old spaceship.
Right.
So they keep it going, keep it on the backlog pretty much for the duration of the war. And after the war, there'll still be rebuilding, so they don't exactly have the manpower to just send somebody over to go take a look.
Yeah.